Narcissism is often misunderstood. When we hear the term, we might picture someone who is overtly arrogant, self-centered, and constantly seeking admiration. But the reality is far more complex. At its core, narcissism is a defense mechanism. It's a mask that covers vulnerability, insecurity, and fear of being unworthy. Narcissists, often driven by a deep-rooted sense of inadequacy, build their personas around a false image of grandeur and superiority to protect themselves from feelings of shame and unworthiness. It's this discrepancy between the mask and the true self that makes narcissism so hard to recognize and so damaging to relationships. To narcissism, we first need to understand that it isn't simply a personality trait, but rather a coping strategy developed in response to early life experiences. Whether from neglect, abuse, or overly critical environments, the narcissist's ego often develops as a shield to keep the painful feelings of rejection, inadequacy, or abandonment at bay. The constant need for external validation, attention, and admiration is not just about self-interest. It's about the narcissist's desperate need to prove to themselves and others that they matter, that they are seen, valued, and worthy of love. Behind the facade, there is often a person who is emotionally disconnected, hiding a fragile self-esteem that could crumble with the slightest criticism or perceived failure. One of the most challenging aspects of dealing with narcissism is recognizing how it manifests. Narcissistic behavior often doesn't look the same for everyone. It can range from grandiose, attention-seeking actions to subtle, more insidious forms of manipulation. Some narcissists are loud, extroverted, and thrive on being the center of attention. Others are more introverted, using passive-aggressive behavior or playing the victim to gain sympathy and control. Both forms, however, share a common thread. They are rooted in a deep fear of vulnerability. They fear that if they show their true selves, they will be rejected, unappreciated, or ridiculed. Thus, they put on a mask of perfection or superiority to hide what they perceive as their flaws. What makes narcissism even more complicated is its ability to deceive others. Narcissists often possess a high level of charm and charisma. They can be incredibly persuasive, even captivating in their interactions with others. Initially, they may seem self-assured, confident, and engaging, traits that can easily draw people in. But these qualities are often part of the performative nature of narcissism. Underneath that charisma is a constant need to feel admired and adored, and the moment they don't receive that attention, the mask begins to crack. This can result in anger, frustration, or even emotional manipulation, where the narcissist attempts to regain control over the narrative and restore their damaged self-image. To understand narcissism is to understand that it is a deeply human, albeit distorted, attempt to protect the self from emotional pain. It's a struggle that comes from a place of fear and hurt. The narcissist doesn't just want admiration, they need it. They don't just want to be right, they need to be right, because being wrong would mean they are unworthy, not enough, or less than. This need for external validation makes relationships with narcissists challenging, as their self-worth is entirely dependent on others' perceptions of them, leaving little room for true emotional intimacy, connection, or mutual vulnerability. Ultimately, recognizing narcissism requires us to look beyond the surface and understand that the behaviors we witness are often a form of emotional armor. The narcissist's need for superiority and control is a protective mechanism against an overwhelming fear of inadequacy and rejection. While their actions may feel self-serving or damaging, beneath it all lies a person who is afraid to show their true self. This understanding doesn't justify their behavior, but helps us approach narcissistic relationships with empathy and clarity, allowing us to set healthy boundaries while also maintaining our own sense of self-worth. The impact of narcissism on relationships. The presence of a narcissist in any relationship, whether romantic, familial, or professional, can have profound emotional consequences. Narcissistic behavior tends to create an environment that is emotionally draining, confusing, and often toxic. For those on the receiving end of narcissism, it can feel as if they are constantly walking on eggshells, never quite knowing how to act or what to say to avoid triggering an emotional storm. This tension arises because narcissists often demand a great deal of attention and admiration, while simultaneously showing little empathy or concern for the emotional needs of others. As a result, relationships with narcissists can feel unbalanced, where one person's needs are constantly sacrificed for the other's inflated ego. One of the most painful impacts of narcissism in relationships is the erosion of trust and emotional safety. Narcissists are skilled at manipulation, often using tactics like gaslighting, making the other person question their reality or sanity. In many cases, the narcissist's behavior is so subtle that it's hard for the other person to pinpoint what's happening. The narcissist might twist conversations, deny events, or shift blame, leaving their partner or loved one feeling confused, isolated, and unsure of their own feelings. Over time, this manipulation creates a dynamic where the other person becomes overly reliant on the narcissist version of events, losing their sense of self and becoming emotionally dependent on someone who doesn't truly care for them in the way they deserve. Emotional exhaustion is another significant byproduct of being in a relationship with a narcissist. The constant emotional roller coaster of ups and downs, where one minute the narcissist may shower you with praise and the next they may devalue you or criticize you, leaves little room for stability or peace. These extreme emotional shifts create a constant state of uncertainty where you are never quite sure where you stand. This leaves those in the relationship feeling as though they are constantly performing, always trying to live up to the narcissist's unrealistic expectations. The effort to please the narcissist can become all-consuming, leading to burnout and a diminished sense of self-worth. In such relationships, it's easy to lose sight of one's own needs, desires, and goals, as everything becomes about managing the narcissist's emotional state. Moreover, narcissistic relationships often involve a cycle of idealization and devaluation. At the beginning of the relationship, the narcissist may make their partner feel like the most important person in the world, showering them with attention, affection, and validation. This is often referred to as love bombing, and it can be incredibly intoxicating for the recipient, who feels seen, appreciated, and deeply connected. However, once the narcissist has gained their partner's trust and dependence, they may shift to devaluing them. They might withdraw affection, criticize, or belittle their partner, leaving them wondering what went wrong. This sudden shift in behavior is jarring and can create a sense of emotional whiplash. The partner is left questioning their own worth, constantly trying to regain the affection and validation they once received, perpetuating a cycle of emotional highs and lows that leaves them feeling stuck and powerless. Another impact of narcissism in relationships is the inability of the narcissist to truly engage in empathy. Empathy is foundational to emotional connection, yet narcissists struggle to recognize or care about the feelings of others. This lack of empathy is not because they are inherently evil, but because their emotional world is dominated by their own needs for validation and control. They are so focused on themselves that they often cannot or will not step outside their own perspective to understand how their actions impact others. This creates a deep void in relationships, as the partner or loved one may feel unheard, unappreciated, and emotionally neglected. The narcissist's inability to connect with the emotional experiences of others makes it difficult, if not impossible, for relationships to feel truly mutual or fulfilling. Ultimately, the impact of narcissism on relationships is profound, affecting everything from trust and emotional safety to self-esteem and personal boundaries. While the narcissist may feel that they are simply protecting themselves or meeting their own needs, the fallout for those around them can be devastating. Relationships become one-sided, emotionally draining, and unsatisfying, leaving the non-narcissistic partner feeling constantly undervalued and unseen. Over time, the toll on emotional well-being becomes clear. Anxiety, depression, self-doubt, and even a sense of worthlessness can develop. The emotional scars left by narcissistic relationships can last long after the relationship has ended, as the individual may struggle with feelings of inadequacy and confusion about their own identity. In the end, the impact of narcissism is not just about the damage caused by the narcissist, but also the emotional toll it takes on those who are in relationship with them, leaving them questioning their own worth and capacity for love. Vulnerability in the face of narcissism, embracing your own needs. In relationships with narcissists, vulnerability can feel like a double-edged sword. On one hand, we are taught that vulnerability is essential for deep emotional connection and intimacy. On the other hand, being vulnerable with a narcissist can often lead to hurt, manipulation, or emotional rejection. Narcissists, with their focus on themselves and their constant need for validation, can leave those around them feeling unimportant, unseen, and emotionally drained. In such environments, it's easy to build walls around our hearts as a form of self-protection, but doing so can prevent us from experiencing true connection with others, especially those who genuinely care for us. The key lies not in closing ourselves off completely, but in understanding how to protect our vulnerability while also embracing it in healthy, constructive ways. The first step in embracing vulnerability is to acknowledge and validate our own emotional needs. Narcissistic relationships often create a power imbalance, where the narcissist's needs are prioritized over the needs of others. Over time, this can lead us to ignore our own emotional well-being, constantly striving to meet the narcissist's demands while sacrificing our own needs. But the truth is, vulnerability begins with self-awareness. It's about recognizing that our feelings, desires, and emotional needs matter. When we start to acknowledge our own humanity, we can begin to allow ourselves to be vulnerable in ways that protect our dignity and sense of self-worth, even when faced with a narcissistic partner, family member, or coworker. Embracing our vulnerability also means recognizing that it's okay to feel and express emotions that are often seen as weak in a narcissistic environment, like sadness, fear, or uncertainty. Narcissists often view emotions as a sign of weakness, exploiting them as tools for manipulation or control. However, when we embrace our vulnerability, we shift the narrative. Vulnerability is not about weakness. It's about being brave enough to acknowledge our humanity, even when it feels uncomfortable. In relationships with narcissists, being vulnerable can mean standing up for ourselves and asserting our own needs, even when it might feel risky or met with resistance. It's about owning our truth without letting others diminish or invalidate it. In the face of narcissism, setting healthy boundaries becomes an essential act of vulnerability. Many people in relationships with narcissists struggle with the idea of setting boundaries because they fear conflict or rejection. However, vulnerability and boundary setting go hand in hand. Vulnerability isn't just about being open with our feelings. It's also about having the courage to say no when necessary and to protect our emotional space from being overwhelmed by someone else's needs. Boundaries allow us to define what is acceptable and what isn't in a relationship, and they provide us with a sense of safety and control. By being vulnerable enough to express our limits, we not only protect ourselves, but we also reclaim our power, preventing the narcissist from taking over our emotional landscape. Self-compassion plays a vital role in embracing vulnerability in the face of narcissism. Narcissistic relationships often leave us questioning our worth, doubting our abilities, and second-guessing our emotions. In such situations, it's easy to become self-critical, internalizing the narcissist's devaluing behavior. However, Self-compassion allows us to respond to ourselves with the same care and kindness that we would offer to a close friend in a similar situation. When we practice self-compassion, we shift our internal dialogue from one of judgment to one of acceptance and understanding. We remind ourselves that it is not only okay to feel vulnerable, but it is also natural to need connection, support, and love. We deserve to be treated with dignity, respect, and kindness, no matter what the narcissist may try to convince us otherwise. Finally, embracing vulnerability in the face of narcissism requires us to recognize that our emotional needs are not selfish or unworthy. Narcissistic behavior often paints the expression of needs or emotions as a burden, portraying others as needy or too sensitive. However, the reality is that we all have emotional needs for connection, support, and validation. These needs are not weaknesses, but rather an essential part of being human. When we embrace our vulnerability and own our emotional needs, we reject the idea that we are somehow less than because we seek love, understanding, and respect. Instead of waiting for the narcissist to meet our needs, we can cultivate self-love and surround ourselves with people who are capable of offering genuine care and connection. In the end, vulnerability is not about giving up our power or allowing ourselves to be victimized. It is about finding the courage to be authentic in the face of fear, to stand up for our needs, and to protect our emotional well-being from those who may try to exploit our vulnerabilities. In relationships with narcissists, embracing vulnerability means recognizing that we have the strength to show up for ourselves even when others may not show up for us in the way we need. It means acknowledging our own worth, setting boundaries, and nurturing our emotional resilience, knowing that vulnerability is ultimately what leads us to a deeper sense of self-empowerment and healthier, more fulfilling relationships. The dynamic of a relationship with a narcissist is often a cycle of emotional highs and lows marked by moments of intense idealization followed by periods of devaluation and manipulation. These extreme shifts create confusion and uncertainty, leaving those involved questioning whether the relationship is worth saving or whether it's time to walk away. Breaking the cycle is one of the most difficult yet crucial decisions to make in such relationships. The first step in understanding when to walk away is recognizing the patterns of behavior that are toxic or damaging to your emotional well-being. This requires self-awareness, an honest reflection of the relationship, and a willingness to face the difficult truth about the impact the narcissist is having on you. One of the primary indicators that it may be time to walk away is if the relationship is consistently undermining your mental and emotional health. Narcissistic relationships often involve manipulation, emotional abuse, and a lack of empathy, leading to feelings of confusion, inadequacy, and self-doubt. If you find yourself constantly questioning your worth, second-guessing your feelings, or feeling like you're walking on eggshells to avoid triggering negative reactions from the narcissist, this is a clear sign that the relationship is no longer serving your well-being. Healthy relationships should foster trust, mutual respect, and emotional safety. And when these foundational elements are consistently missing, it's important to ask yourself whether staying is in alignment with your true needs and values. Another key sign that it's time to walk away is if the narcissist is unwilling or unable to acknowledge their harmful behavior. Narcissists often resist taking responsibility for their actions, frequently blaming others for their mistakes or shortcomings. If the narcissist consistently deflects blame, dismisses your concerns, or gaslights you into believing you are the problem, it can be incredibly disempowering. This lack of accountability creates a one-sided relationship where you may end up feeling isolated, unheard, and unimportant. In such situations, it's essential to recognize that your emotional needs are valid and you deserve a partner who can meet them with empathy and care, not denial or manipulation. However, it's also important to recognize that not every moment of tension or conflict in a narcissistic relationship automatically signals the need to leave. Relationships are complex, and sometimes the cycle of idealization and devaluation can be broken with conscious effort, boundaries, and a commitment to healthier communication. If the narcissist shows signs of self-awareness, is willing to engage in therapy, and expresses genuine remorse for their behavior, there may be a possibility of repair. The key here is to assess whether the narcissist's behavior is consistent with a willingness to change. True change in a narcissist requires them to confront the underlying insecurities and defensiveness that drive their behavior. If they are unwilling to do this work or are resistant to change, it may be a sign that the cycle will continue and the relationship is unlikely to improve. When considering whether to stay or leave, it's crucial to evaluate your own emotional needs and the toll the relationship is taking on you. Narcissistic relationships can be deeply draining, leaving you feeling emotionally exhausted, isolated, and even physically unwell. If the relationship is causing long-term stress, anxiety, or depression, walking away may be the healthiest option. It's essential to prioritize your mental and physical well-being, and this often means recognizing that you cannot save someone else at the cost of losing yourself. There is no shame in walking away from a relationship that is causing harm. In fact, choosing to leave can be a powerful act of self-love and self-preservation. Yet there are times when it's worth exploring whether you can break the cycle while remaining in the relationship, particularly if there is a shared history or deep emotional connection. In these cases, the process of breaking the cycle requires creating and enforcing boundaries. Boundaries are the framework within which any relationship can be healthy, but they are especially crucial in narcissistic relationships. Setting clear boundaries around what behaviors are unacceptable, such as emotional manipulation or verbal abuse, and holding the narcissist accountable to these boundaries can lead to healthier dynamics. However, setting boundaries with a narcissist is not always easy. Narcissists are often skilled at pushing limits and testing boundaries. Therefore, it is essential to approach the situation with clarity and consistency. Even with boundaries in place, it's important to recognize that you can only control your own behavior and responses. You cannot change the narcissist's behavior, and expecting them to suddenly become empathetic or reasonable may set you up for disappointment. The reality is that narcissists are often entrenched in their ways, and it may take a significant amount of time, energy, and personal sacrifice to witness any genuine transformation. During this process, it's critical to stay connected to your own values and sense of self. Constantly evaluating how the relationship aligns with your emotional needs and goals can help you avoid losing sight of who you are in the midst of navigating the narcissist's needs. Lastly, there may come a point in the relationship where it becomes clear that staying is no longer an option, no matter how much effort has been invested. This realization can be incredibly difficult, especially if there is a deep emotional bond or shared history. But the most important factor in this decision is the preservation of your own mental and emotional health. Walking away does not mean you are giving up on the relationship. It means you are choosing to prioritize yourself. It means acknowledging that despite your best efforts, the relationship is causing more harm than good. Walking away is an act of reclaiming your power, and while it may feel painful in the moment, it is often the first step toward healing and building a future that aligns with your true self. Healing after the storm, restoring your sense of self. Recovering from a relationship with a narcissist is often a long, challenging journey that requires deep emotional work, self-compassion, and a willingness to rediscover who you are outside of the chaos. Narcissistic relationships, whether romantic, familial, or professional, can leave deep scars. The emotional manipulation, gaslighting, and devaluation can cause you to lose touch with your own sense of self-worth and identity. After the storm of narcissism, it's essential to begin the healing process by first acknowledging the impact it has had on you. Healing is not linear, and it's important to give yourself grace as you navigate this difficult journey toward reclaiming your inner strength and sense of self. The first step in healing is allowing yourself to mourn what has been lost. Narcissistic relationships often leave behind emotional wounds that are difficult to articulate. You may feel as though you've lost a part of yourself, or perhaps you've been left feeling betrayed, confused, or invalidated. Acknowledging the pain and the grief of the situation is necessary in the healing process. Emotion. It's not about dwelling in the pain, but rather about recognizing that the emotional toll of such a relationship is real. It's okay to grieve the person you thought the narcissist was, the future you envisioned with them, and the emotional safety you never truly had. By giving yourself permission to grieve, you begin to release the emotional burden that has been weighing you down, allowing space for healing and growth. Once you've allowed yourself to grieve, the next step is to focus on restoring your sense of self-worth. Narcissistic relationships often erode self-esteem, causing you to doubt your abilities, your judgment, and even your basic worthiness as a person. This is a deeply damaging effect as your sense of self becomes entangled with the narcissist's actions and words. Rebuilding your self-worth involves reconnecting with your own values, passions, and desires. Start by reminding yourself of the things that make you unique and valuable, your talents, your strengths, and the qualities that have always been a part of who you are. Self-worth isn't based on the approval of others, but rather on a deep internal knowing that you deserve respect, kindness, and love simply because you exist. A crucial part of restoring your sense of self is letting go of the narcissist narrative. Narcissists are often skilled at shaping the story of the relationship, manipulating your perception of reality and convincing you that you are at fault for everything that went wrong. This manipulation can lead you to internalize their version of events and believe that you were never good enough. To heal, you must reclaim your narrative and recognize that the narcissist version of reality does not define you. This process involves recognizing the truth of your own experiences, the ways in which the narcissist's behavior hurt you, manipulated you, and ultimately created an unhealthy dynamic. By acknowledging your truth, you start to disentangle yourself from the emotional control the narcissist had over you. Rebuilding your identity requires time and space to rediscover what brings you joy and fulfillment. During a narcissistic relationship, your interests, hobbies, and passions may have been sidelined or diminished in importance. The narcissist's need for attention and control often left little room for your own personal growth. Now, healing involves reconnecting with those parts of yourself that were neglected, whether it's pursuing a long-forgotten hobby, engaging in activities that bring you joy, or simply spending time in solitude to reconnect with your inner self. These actions are all vital steps in the process of reclaiming who you are. It's also important to surround yourself with people who encourage and uplift you, people who reflect your worth back to you in a way that is affirming and supportive. Another key aspect of healing after narcissistic abuse is setting new boundaries and learning how to protect your energy. Narcissistic relationships often leave you feeling drained as the narcissist demands a constant supply of attention, admiration, and validation. These relationships can teach you the importance of boundaries, what you are willing to accept and what you won't tolerate. Healing is about learning to say no without guilt, to put yourself first without feeling selfish, and to ensure that your energy is spent on relationships and activities that nurture you rather than deplete you. Boundaries also serve as a reminder that you have control over your own life and that your emotional well-being matters. By setting healthy boundaries, you begin to reclaim your power and take ownership of your healing process. One of the most empowering aspects of healing after narcissistic abuse is developing emotional resilience. Narcissistic relationships can leave you feeling vulnerable and fragile, questioning your ability to trust others or even yourself. But the journey of healing is also one of empowerment. With each step forward, you build emotional strength. You learn to trust your intuition again, to listen to your inner voice, and to make decisions that are in alignment with your true self. Emotional resilience means being able to face challenges without being knocked off course, to bounce back after setbacks, and to recognize that your worth isn't dependent on the opinions or actions of others. It's about embracing your imperfections and learning to thrive despite the emotional toll you've endured. Finally, healing is about cultivating self-compassion and forgiveness. It's important to remember that healing is a process and that you don't have to have everything figured out right away. Be kind to yourself during moments of self-doubt and avoid falling into the trap of self-blame. Narcissistic relationships often leave individuals feeling like they are somehow responsible for the abuse or emotional manipulation, but this is not the truth. You did not deserve to be treated poorly, and you are not to blame for the narcissist's actions. Forgiveness in this context doesn't mean excusing the narcissist's behavior. It means releasing the grip that the past has on you. It's about letting go of the anger, resentment, and bitterness that can keep you tethered to the pain of the past, allowing you to create space for peace and healing. In the end, healing after the storm of narcissistic abuse is about reclaiming your sense of self, your emotional health, and your power. It's a journey that takes time, patience, and support, but it is entirely possible. By embracing self-compassion, setting boundaries, rediscovering your passions, and letting go of the narcissist narrative, you can restore your sense of identity and step into a life that is authentic, fulfilling, and grounded in your own worth. Healing doesn't mean forgetting the past, but it does mean learning to live with it in a way that empowers you rather than diminishes you. You are worthy of love, respect, and a life filled with meaningful connections. And that begins with the powerful act of healing from the storm.